Hi, in this episode I'm going to be showing you guys how to configure the Shogun Flame made by Atomos for the a7S Mark II. After you make sure you get your camera plugged into the HDMI port and plug it into the Atomos. One thing I like to do on startup here is access the Sony camera and do some settings. If you haven't watched my previous episode on doing the manual setups for filmmaking inside of the Sony a7S II, I would recommend doing that before you start this tutorial, so you know how to set up your camera completely before you start working on with the Atomos. One thing I like on to do with the a7S Mark II is I'm going to go under Menu. Under Menu, I'm going to arrow over to the right. This is on the Sony camera here. Actually, I'm going to arrow up all the way to get to the camera menu, then quickly skip through these menus, get to the last one, arrow down, and go into this menu, and we're going to move over to HDMI settings. I'm going to select HDMI settings. I'm going to do HDMI resolution, and we're going to set this up for 2160p, which is Ultra HD. I'm going to select that. And then I'm going to move down, select this, and we're going to do 24p out instead of 60p out to the monitor, to the Atomos monitor. I like to go down to the control for HDMI, select that, and turn this on. So you get your control for HDMI, and then I'm going to also go up to timecode output, because I'm going to use timecode to trigger my record button on my Atomos. So I'm going to arrow up and go to timecode output on, record control on. And we are all set. All those things are on right there, and we can menu out of that, and we can go to the Atomos and start setting up the Atomos. Available when I hit record. I set up my record button for C3 up here. You can also use the record button on the side, but I've gone in the custom settings and set it up for C3. So when I hit record, it's actually going to, on the camera, the Atomos is actually going to detect timecode running, and it will start recording on the Atomos as well as on the card inside the camera. So I basically have two copies. One is a 100 megabits per second copy. The other one's going to be a ProRes 422 or ProRes HQ codec. So let's go to the Atomos and show you how to start setting that up. Okay, within the Atomos here, let's go through some quick setup items here. We've got our little bars along the top, then we've got some menu options along the bottom here. These in particular here are going to be helpful for filmmaking, as well as these settings up here. I'm going to hit my HDMI little button up here and go into the HDMI, the input settings, and make sure that everything is looking good here. The camera should be coming out as a 4K UHD 23.98, so since I matched those settings inside my camera, it's showing here that the settings are set for the UHD, the 4K settings, at the same frame rate. You want to make sure that is the same frame rate. And if you hit the source here, it'll change from SDI to HDMI, but we're working with HDMI since we are on the Sony a7S II. But here on trigger, what I've got set up here is I'm going to select this, and you got HDMI trigger on. It just detects when the shot is rolling, but I like to put it on timecode so it matches the timecode that is coming out of the camera. The type of trigger is timecode, so when it reads timecode, it's going to trigger if my trigger is turned on. So I'm going to hit that and turn my trigger on. That's very important to make sure that's turned on, or it will not record. So I'm going to get out of this now, and when I hit record on the camera, you'll see that it starts recording, and make sure that your record changes to that little square right there. If it's not, that just means it's reading timecode and not recording. I can see my light blinking up here. I can see the record button recording there, and it's good to go. So I'm going to stop on the camera, and it stops recording on the Atomos. But what we've got a waveform reading here. It's a little different than a histogram. It's a waveform instead. Shows your image from left to right at 100 IRE at the top, where your highlights disappear if it clips at the very top. You're losing detail at the top there on the whites, and then here are your darks. If you're going to start losing detail in your darks down there. So you try to get kind of a middle range exposure here whenever you're exposing something. And I usually test exposure on the camera display, just because the camera display has that histogram, which is going to be helpful as well, and I can compare the two to get a good exposure. So moving across from the HDMI, we're going to hit this 4K. It's going to bring up the exact same menu here with your input. So hitting HDMI and your format there does the same thing, goes the same menu. I'm going to hit ProRes here at the top. This is your codec that you're shooting in. You can shoot in DNX or you can shoot in ProRes. I like shooting in ProRes. I'm very familiar with the data rates, and you can see that the data rates, how they compare here, because you get about the same amount of time for Apple ProRes HQ as you do for the DNX codec HQX over here. Those are pretty much the same data rate, very, very close, because they give you the exact same recording time. You can look those up online if you wish to see what your data rate is on these specific formats that give you higher or lower quality. ProRes works on both, and it does Cinema DNG as well, but ProRes works really, really well for almost any editing system, whether you're on a PC or Mac. But I like ProRes HQ, depending on how much time you want on these cards. If you're recording some little demonstration that you want to get more footage out of, you can change your HQ to a different format, and if you go down to ProRes LQ, you get 3 hours on this card, this 500 gig card that I have inserted into my Atomos recorder. So I'm going to go ProRes. For film, I'm pretty much always going to do ProRes HQ, the highest quality possible. Hit OK or hit the X to get out. As we move over here, we got the top settings here. This is your film naming. You can name your media by scene number and shot number. By scene number and shot number, or scene and take number, basically. You can go ahead and change these things. We're not really going to get into that right now, because I do most of the naming in post-production, and I leave the names, just the original names on the card. That the Atomos is set up for. If you hit your little media right there, it shows you got an hour and 24 minutes essentially of footage you can shoot on this card. But this is where you format your media. You hit format, you're sure, say yes, and my card has been formatted. And it formats into exFAT, so it'll work on both PC and Mac. You can read and write to it. It doesn't have the 4 gig restraints on the file size. And then you have your battery power up at the top here. And I've got 2 batteries installed right now, so it's going to suck up the power on one battery before it moves over to the other one. Down here, we're going to go to menu. Let's go to menu and show you some basic menu features. You have access to just what firmware version you have by hitting information here. It'll show you your version to see if you're up to date. You can go online and look to see if you need to upgrade the firmware. And go back here. You have some display options here, which if you're turning your monitor upside down and things, you can change you can flip your horizon here and turn a tally light on and display light on. For filmmaking stuff, the flip is probably going to be the best thing. If you need to turn your monitor upside down to get into a weird spot, you can. But those are the key features in there. If you want to start your time code at a certain time, you can. But right now it's going to be reading it from the camera. So if you're going to be doing the time code settings, I'd go into the camera and set them instead, because it's going to be, since I got this on time code triggering. Let's get out of our menu. And let's show some options down here. We hit this first little button right here, and this brings up different types of scopes that we're going to be working with. It brings up a different type of waveform. It's got a Luma waveform, it's got an RGB waveform, and it's got a vector scope. So if you want to look at your display, you got your red channel, green channel, blue channel, and your exposure in each channel. Like I said, I usually kind of refer more to the camera on these things because they're sending the signal directly over. But if you want, I can usually just keep my Luma waveform on so you can see your exposure at all times. And here on display sizes, you have different displays. If you want to look at your waveform more full screen, you can hit the far right here, and it brings it up over here so you can get your exposure just right. And then you also have things like transparency and brightness with that waveform right there. So that's going to be helping you with the exposure. I'm going to put my display down in the bottom left-hand corner. I'm going to go to the next little item here, the second one over. And this one is your monitor assist. This helps with focusing. If you want to turn, my favorite here is to turn my peaking on at the top right there. My peaking is turned on right there. My monitor assist is turned on. And I have different types of focus peaking down here. You can change your color just by sliding your finger along this and getting it into what color you like. So we got this greenish color. And now when I focus, I can see what is in focus by getting a heavy concentration of that green peaking here on the monitor. You also have different peaking modes here. You have your color mode, you have your grayscale mode, and you have this kind of black and white negative mode here to really see what is in focus. And that's really helpful to get something in really sharp focus. But make sure you put it back onto your regular screen there. And if you want to turn that off, you've got things like zebras and some other coloration things here that I don't really use as much as just the peak. And the zebras are for exposure, and you can set your exposure at like a certain percentage zebra on this. You also have your guides down here. As you push these little buttons here, you have a 16:9 guide mode. You have 2.40 to 2.39 essentially for doing cinematic guides. It'll record the image up here and up here. It's just giving you a guide if you're going to be cropping this in post-production for a wider screen image. and you also have 235, 19 as you go through these. 185, the standards are 185 and 235 are kind of the standards, and 16:9. The standards here for your aspect ratios are going to be 16:9 HD, 1.85, which is standard film aspect ratio, and for kind of cinescope you got your 235 mode right there. So I'm going to put this onto 1.85. Go over to the next little button here. You got some things to basically flag your footage as you record. You can kind of mark your clips, and it puts metadata into the information. We're not going to get into that too much because everything on a film set is slated and written down by a script supervisor. We're going to go to the last tab, the last little setting tab right here, and this is going to be really important. We're going to show you some setups here as you're getting if you're shooting an S-Log or some sort of Cine-Log footage coming to the camera here, you might want to be able to view your footage in what's called a LUT, an LUT, to kind of get a custom look while you're shooting that doesn't burn that look into the footage. It leaves the original footage alone, but it just displays it in a certain look on this monitor here while you're shooting, so you can kind of get your artistic vision of what you want to do, how you want your film to look while you're shooting. But then when you take it onto the editor, it's going to look flat again, and it's going to be color graded later. But it's just giving you your artistic vision here. So what we've got here is we've got different monitor modes here to view. Then we've got Rec 709 look, and this is probably going to be the most accurate display of your camera. I'm looking at my camera here, and these shots are now looking fairly close. You also have the Atomos HDR mode. We're not really going to use that. Log to video, different types of going from like Sony log to you can tell what type of camera you're using here and get certain looks. But I'm not going to use that either. We're going to show you kind of a better way of going here. There's my Sony look there. I was trying to grade it from the camera to this. I'm going to go to a custom look. And custom look is going to give you access to 8 different lookup tables. You can load to this device here 8 different looks. So what we're going to do is, and you can do this with Davinci Resolve. Davinci Resolve is free, so you can create what's called a 3D LUT, and you can install it to your Atomos card and then install it to this device right here to get kind of that look that you're looking for. And right now I only have one LUT loaded. So if you click on any of these right here, you'll notice that these are all, it's got this little color right there. I mean, I have one look loaded. The rest of these I have nothing on them. So this is going to kind of display what's coming right out of the camera. It's a very flat profile right now, which is fine. But if I want to see my artistic vision while I'm shooting, I'm going to load that. Let's show how to do that in Resolve. But the first step to this is to shoot some test footage with the general kind of lighting that you might be using for the film. So I'm going to hit my record button on my camera, triggers, and you notice it is turned to that square there, and you got the light blinking, so I know that I'm recording. And that should be enough. I can do a little pan here if I want to, whatever, just so I get a little movement, whatever. And now I'm going to stop, and I've got a shot recorded that I'm going to take into Resolve. Okay, so we're going to start in Resolve here. I can name my project if I want. I'm not going to. I'm just going to double-click on my project, start Resolve. This is the free version of Resolve. This is not the studio version. That's a little bit different than this. But you can go up to File here and go Import Media. I'm going to import the media. I'm going to go to, I can just go to the card directly, select that clip, and you change your frame rate to match the project settings basically. So there we go. And now I move over to the Edit tab. The Edit tab, I can grab my imported media and drag it into the timeline. And now we go to Color. And we've got access to color grading this clip. If you're not familiar with the Resolve, I recommend watching the Resolve tutorials I have on my channel. I got a playlist for it, so you can go through and kind of look at that. But right now, we're just going to do some basic grading here. Actually, I'm gonna make it a little extreme to kind of give this a funky look here, so we can really see it when we go back to the Shogun Flame, the Atomos Shogun Flame. Here, I'm going to go up to Workspaces. I'm going to go to Video Scopes and turn those on, so we can kind of see what we're doing here with our scopes. Let's move this up here, kind of a small screen, but let's add some warmth to this. I'm just going to grab this. I'm going to grab my gamma here and drag it up to kind of the orange, and we're going to make this really warm. We're going to make maybe like a sepia tone look that we want to see our LUT in. Like if you're doing some cool high contrasty black and white, pushing it up there. I'm giving a heavy push to the reds and a little bit of the greens and then less blues here, so it's kind of looking heavily sepia tone. Let's add some contrast as well. I'm going to grab my curves down here and drag my darks and bring them down, and grab my highlights and create an S curve and create a really heavy look here. I wouldn't recommend creating these really heavy looks. I'm just doing it so you can see the difference between the LUTs and not using the LUTs here. But now that I'm done with that, I can close. my scopes here, and we've got the look that I want to shoot in. That will, or keep in mind, the Atomos will not record in this look. It just displays the look, so you can kind of see your artistic vision while you're shooting. Especially if you're shooting something like a film noir and you want to know if somebody disappears into the darks, you can go in and create your LUT, and you can see them disappear into the darks when you're actually shooting. Once that's done and I've got kind of a look here, I'm going to right-click over on my clip here in my mini timeline, and we're going to go to Generate 3D LUT Cube here. Click on that, and I'm going to go to my card now, and I'm going to save this on my card. I'm going to call this, we'll call this Sepia Look. Save that. If we go to the card now, you'll see it has saved that cube right here with that sepia look right there. So now I can close this, eject my card, and take the card back to the camera. Back to the camera, I'm going to slide my card back in. My card has been slid back into the camera. Now we're going to go to our little menu right there, the yellow menu there, and it brings up our LUTs. And we're going to go to folder here. Click on the folder, and it's going to search the card for any LUTs that you've loaded. And there's my sepia look right there. I'm going to select that. Click on it again. You select it, click on it again, and it will load the LUT to the Shogun Flame. That's been added, and it has added. By the way, I had number 7 selected. If you want to put it on a different number here, let's go to 2 and do it on 2. I'm going to go once again, repeat the process. It's on 2. Select the folder, select the LUT, click it again, and it will load it to that profile. And there we go. And we had the sepia tone look, and there's one that I did that was black and white here. Here's a sepia tone look, and if you hit any of these that doesn't have the color on it, nothing has been loaded onto those ones yet. And you can do several different looks. If you're shooting a movie, you can have you can have up to 8 looks loaded onto this thing, and you can switch back and forth between them. So that is essentially it for setting up the Atomos for recording for filmmaking. If you have any questions, please post them, and I will get back with you. Thank you so much.